All right, beautiful. Welcome, everyone. This is an intro to sociocracy through the Deep Adaptation Forum. My name is Andra Vltavín. I'm based in Portland, Oregon. I'm currently training with Sociocracy for All. I am a certified sociocracy facilitator, and I'm working toward my trainer and consultant certification. So I'm really happy to be here with you all and share some strategies and tools about collaborative governance and how to be more equitable in our meetings and in our collaboration with each other. So we just checked in, and I will go ahead and share my screen and start presenting here. Okay, beautiful. So if you have questions throughout the presentation, please type them into the chat and we can talk about them at the end. And there will be opportunities for participation throughout. So feel free to chime in when that happens. And yeah, hang on, let me share this a little bit differently so I can still see you all. Okay, that's much better. All right, so yeah, let's jump right into it. So just so that we all have a clear understanding of what governance is, in sociocracy, we talk about it like steering. So we're steering how decisions are made and ratified, who is making the decisions, and steering how we review and improve ourselves over time. So how we are growing as an organization over time. So I just want to do a little exercise. Maybe just take a moment and close your eyes and think about the groups that you're in right now, the groups where you feel most inspired, where you feel like you truly have the capacity to make positive change in the world in some way. Just pulling to mind whatever spaces you're in where that's happening. And then just feeling into this question, even in this space where there's a lot of inspiration and a lot of positivity and motivation and optimism, what's not working about how you all are getting things done? And just feeling how that feels in your body as you consider this question. Where do you feel the friction in the group? Maybe where is there unclaimed or unnamed power? Where does it feel out of balance? And why do you think that might be? Then gently coming out of your inner space, maybe opening your eyes if you had them closed. And yeah, maybe raise your hand, or you can raise your hand on Zoom also. Just maybe popcorn a couple shares of what isn't working in the groups you're collaborating in right now. Anybody feel like offering something? Go for it, Julie.
Feel like I'm a guest, so I want other people to go first. But a real quick one would be, I would say project management, like when different teams are doing different things, and how do we actually, like I've seen Kanban type, anyway, but it's not happening in this group. It's like everybody's still sort of doing their own thing and reaching out to whoever they need to talk to via email, and it's just not clean and easy to see, and some people may feel left out.
Yeah, yeah, thank you for that. I'm curious if we have maybe one more share of something that's not working in your groups right now.
Sure, yeah. I would say the more community organizing groups I'm working with are actually doing really well, but I also work in higher education, and I'm finding that the sort of white man energy isn't working right now. I'll just leave it like that.
Thank you for naming that. Yeah, appreciate that. Yeah, so beautiful. Thank you for those shares. And I want to name that talking about governance can be really vulnerable and can be really scary. And especially if you're in group spaces where you're talking about it with that group. And so just want to name that it's okay if this pulls up emotions for you. If that's there, it's all right. It's welcome in the space. And yeah, we'll just keep moving it through our bodies. So to add to those shares about, what's not working and why we might want to move into collaborative governance together, you might find that your team isn't really engaging as much as you'd like them to. You might really crave moving away from power over structures, so sort of that hierarchical model that Cairo was maybe mentioning a little bit with the identity politics coming in. And then making informed choices with people who are most impacted. So making sure that the people who are affected by the decision are involved in the decision-making process. And then you want to, we're in a lot of meetings these days. A lot of times we're on screen a lot with other people, and that's how we get stuff done. But we can often leave meetings feeling like, oh, that didn't feel great, or just the energy was off, or we didn't get enough done. And so collaborative governance is a way to leave those meetings feeling more energized and inspired. And then we've kind of experimented with a lot of majority rules governance in especially like democratic settings. And what happens is that we just end up with these polarizing forces. And so we're kind of moving away from that polarization into this collaborative governance structure. So I do want to say that before you really have a group that can move into collaborative governance, what I've seen is that you really need to have some shared values as a group. So without these sort of values, it's really difficult to make this transition. I just want to name that. So this might be a good place for groups to start if they're looking toward collaborative governance, but they need to do some work in terms of really caring about shared decision making. Like if there's a lot of discomfort with the idea of shared decision making, then there's some unpacking and maybe some trauma that needs to be done around that first. I talk about commitment to process. So not just leaving a group when there's a conflict, but really like caring and staying with the process and doing restoratives and other types of processes to do conflict resolution. So commitment to process. Growth mindset, just this desire to keep learning and growing as a group, and then a respect for diverse perspectives. So I wouldn't move into trying to shift your whole governance structure in a group until you have some of these shared values that you can all commit to together. And this would be a good place to start working if your group is maybe not quite there yet. And a lot of us are in these really powerful groups that are doing environmental work, that are doing restoration work. But it's really important to remember that no matter the mission, we need healthy group structures in order to accomplish it. So we're regenerating culture as we're regenerating land, as we're regenerating ourselves and all of these things. So really making sure that our group dynamics are healthy as we move into this. So these are all the reasons that you might seek out a collaborative governance structure. And I'm most familiar with sociocracy, so that's what I'm going to focus on today. Sociocracy started in its babyest form in the 1930s as a way for teachers and students to create co-learning environments together. And there was a person who attended that school where that was happening, Gerard Edinburgh, and he really was inspired by it and then brought his engineering background to it in the 1980s and developed sociocracy as a full-blown governance structure. So socio means those who associate, ocracy means governance. So those who associate govern together is kind of the idea here. And then sociocracy is based on three pillars. So consent, making sure that all of the decisions we're making are within everyone's range of tolerance. Transparency, making sure that there's clear communication flows throughout the group. And on a regular time period so that we can learn from it, so that we can improve over time, and so we can co-create that shared reality around what we're doing and why together on a regular basis. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide. It's pretty dense, but these are just sort of and I do want to say I will post the link to this slideshow in the chat so you don't have to take too many notes and you can review it later if you're curious. But these are different styles of governance. So autocracy is a lot of the kind of top-down corporate structures that we think of. Democracy, I think some of us have had like familiarity with. No governance system or anarchic governance systems. That happens often in like mutual aid groups or groups that are newly forming that kind of operate this way. You might be familiar with consensus, which is the idea where everyone has to agree on the decision before it can fully get made. And it often happens in like really big group settings. And then sociocracy has particular circles and roles where decisions get made. So it's very distributed leadership. And we're focusing on consent rather than consensus. So thinking about like, okay, you might not love this decision, but can you stand behind it? Does it feel good enough for now, safe enough to try? Moving on from that. So, okay, let's do another little visualization here. So maybe close your eyes for a moment, settle into your body. And maybe taking some deeper breaths. Just thinking about how do you want to feel in your body when you leave a meeting? What would it be like if you left the meeting feeling inspired? How would it feel in your body? How would you want to feel toward your collaborators at the end of the meeting? How might it feel to get kind and thoughtful feedback from your group to help you learn and grow? How might that feel in your body? So gently returning to your breathing. And if you had your eyes closed, you can open them to return. So those feelings of inspiration, of collaboration, of growth are the types of things that we want to establish in a sociocratic culture. And so it sounds exciting. I hope you're excited about it. So how do we start? How do we actually do this in practice? What are the tools and the techniques of this? So to get started, I would say you need a group of 4 or more people. This can be as small as 4. I think you can do it with 3, but it's a little tricky. And it can be as big as you want. So there's a lot of that have lots and lots of tiered circles and communicate pretty well with each other. You have to want to do something together, have some kind of shared goal, and meant for a defined period of time. So let's try this for a year. Let's try this for a couple years. So you have a cohesive group that wants to do something together. So at that point, you're a single circle organization. And so, yeah, at this point, you have 4 to 10 circles. And the reason that you don't want your circles to get too big is because we really want to hear from all voices in the room. And that can get very tedious the more people you have. So it's more than 10 people. And even I would say before that, I would say 4 to 8 is a good number, really. But the point you have that many people, you might split into different circles. And I'll talk about that later in the presentation. But this single circle should be focused on one aim or goal. And then you have facilitated conversations with question and reactions rounds. And I will kind of show you what that looks like in a minute. I also want to name that sociocracy is not really an out-of-the-box strategy. It's meant to be adaptable to specific groups, meant to be a customizable solution. So we can give you the tools, but it's going to look a little bit different from group to group. There's these words in sociocracy that I want to offer definitions to that can be really helpful as you're forming your group. So your vision, what would the everyone did this. So this is like your broadest, biggest thought together. And then the mission, what part of that vision does your team want to focus on? What is the piece that you feel like your group actually, and the aim, how will you contribute to that mission that is building toward that vision for the world? And then the domain, what does your team actually have authority and control over? What is your purview? They're really important questions when you're forming a new group or when you're forming a new circle, to really dial in, like, why are we here? What's going on? What brings us together in this moment? And so some examples that we can talk about. Let's assume that our vision is a world where everyone has access to potable water. That's a goal, but it's our mission. That's really what's driving this work. That's the beauty that we're seeking, and we want to contribute to some small part of that. Then the mission, bringing that down just a little bit to be more attainable, is that the water is more drinkable. And we're recognizing this might not be accomplishable in our lifetime, that we're working toward over time, and it's the piece that we can focus on while we're here as a group. And then the aim is to organize volunteers to engage in ecological restoration for the watershed. So that's the way that we're trying to achieve the mission in this circle. And you might have multiple different aims that are all doing something different to contribute to the mission. But for the sake of thinking about a single circle organization, then you're going to have that one single aim, maybe 2 or 3, but trying to keep it tight and concise. And then so the domain of the circle would then be volunteer coordination, outreach, planting, soil testing, and water testing. That's what the group in this example would have control over, would have authority over, and could actually make change on and make decisions about. So in this theoretical circle where we're trying to do restoration work on the watershed, we would be, in sociocratic meeting facilitation, we'd be speaking in conversational rounds. So this is a process so you can hear everyone moving through these decision-making processes. And I would say that this is key to introducing sociocracy for the first time and being really present in that as a mode in a practice. And the rounds start becoming very second nature, but at first they can seem a little clunky. Like if people are used to raising hands, if people are used to sharing popcorn style, it can be a little bit different. But what I find is that as you start building culture of speaking in rounds, people trust that they don't have to raise their hand to be heard. They trust that their turn is going to come. It offers the opportunity for everyone to really think about what they would like to share. People can pass if they don't want to share, but it offers space for each voice in the room to be heard. It also helps to discourage really tense back and forths. So oftentimes in a meeting, what causes the most tension is when 2 people keep talking and kind of dominating the space. And so the conversational rounds help with that conversational turn taking. And yeah, and then it's just really building that culture of trust, that we really do genuinely care about hearing everyone's input. So in a practical sense, this is what the meeting structure might look like. And Sociocracy for All has a bunch of templates on how to do this, and like sample agendas that are really easy plug and play sort of situations. And I have those links at the end of this presentation. But just to give you an idea, so we'd start with check-ins. This is a way to create that relational culture, to understand how people are coming into a meeting, what kind of energy they're bringing in, and just start building that shared reality. Because when we have that shared reality, then it's easier to collaborate on the ways that we want to then modify or change our reality outside of the group. We start from a really strong anchored place of shared reality. And then you might go through report backs, announcement, action item review, which is pretty typical of most meetings. And then you would all consent to the agenda. So someone, usually the facilitator or the secretary, and I'll talk a little bit more about those meeting roles later, but someone will develop the agenda. They will post it maybe in the chat if it's a virtual meeting, or maybe they'd write it up on the board. They'd write what we're talking about, how long we're going to talk about it for, and who's introducing the topic. And then we would all consent to the agenda or have the opportunity to consent to the agenda. So at that point, you'd say, yes, I really like this order. I like what's on the agenda. I consent to it. Yes, this is safe enough to try, good enough for now. And then if you object to the agenda, you say like, oh, you know what, I have to leave early. So it'd be really helpful if we moved this agenda topic earlier, something like that. So that gives everyone a chance to consent to the overall meeting framework so that, again, we're building that shared context, that shared reality of what did we agree to do while we were here together. Because sometimes in meetings where the agenda is created by somebody else and you're just moving through things and you're really frustrated, like, why are we even talking about this? That can really cause a lot of tension in the group space. So making sure that there is that primary consent at the beginning of meetings. And then there's two primary modes of moving into like conversation in a meeting. So there's exploration and proposal. So exploration is, hey, this isn't a fully fleshed out thought, but I just kind of want to get temperature check, group feedback. How do you all feel about this? How can we do some brainstorming about this problem that's coming up or this thing that's coming down the pipeline? And how can we move through that? And so in that exploration, we would do a round of questions, like how, if we're introducing a topic, does anyone have any questions about that topic? Are we all understanding that topic? And you'd go around, the facilitator would call on names or you'd go in a circle, whichever makes sense. And then you'd move into a comment round and says how they feel about that topic. Like, okay, well, this is how I feel. This is what I think we should do. And then at that point, that might be all that's needed about the topic. We'll say, okay, I'll come back next time with the proposal. Thank you for the feedback. If it has, it seems like they're coming to some synthesis around what everyone wants to do, then you might shift into a proposal where you'd ask for everyone's consent and ask about the objections are like, hey, we're about to do is counterproductive to our aim as a circle. Or I really don't think this is safe enough to try. It's not so much like, I just don't like this idea, or I prefer. It's really thinking about like, is this safe enough to try? Is this good enough for now? Is in alignment with our circle's aim? A little bit more about that in a moment. So after those explorations, proposals, you move into backlog review. Do we have time to pull in other things that we would like to talk about? And then action item read back. And meeting back is my favorite part of the meeting. This really, for me, brings in that shared reality piece where I don't know if you've left meetings feeling, that was really frustrating. I felt a lot of tension and now I don't know how to like deal with that tension in my body. Meeting feedback can really help to say like, hey, this part didn't feel so good to me, or like, hey, I really appreciated this facilitation style that really helped me feel comfortable speaking up. So really bring that opportunity for us to learn from each other and to be continually building that shared context. So I
Okay, next on the agenda.
Play this video in just a moment. Just gonna make sure that I have my sound optimized, but it'll just give you an idea of what these rounds actually sound like in practice. This is just a 2.5-minute video, but it'll show you a little about how these rounds work in practice.
Agenda is Luciano, and he's got something for us on the learning stipend.
Yeah, thank you. Well, as you know, I'm an advocate of this issue. The present learning stipend is 500, and many people don't use it, I have to say, but for people who use it, it's not. So the proposal is to raise it from 500 to 750. That's all. That's the proposal.
Thanks, Luciano. Was that proposal clear for everybody? We have any questions on that? All right, let's do a reaction round then. Lizzie and then Adam, and then I'll go, and then Michael, Luciano. Lizzie?
Yeah, I think it's really exciting and useful, and I feel like it will help people find some more valuable courses to help them. Check.
Thanks, Lizzie. Adam, and then I'll go.
Yeah, I mean, like we were talking about it last meeting, the financials look good for it. All the people who weren't using it kind of cover the people who are going to use some extra, so that's great from my end. And I'm looking forward to taking a couple extra courses that I got my eye on. So check.
Great, thanks. Yeah, same. I think it's a good idea. I know we talked about that we've got room in the budget for it, so I think it's great. So check. Michael?
Yeah, thank you for putting this together. I feel like it's really clear and it'll be good for our circle and for the org.
All right, and Luciano?
Yeah, just glad that it went through. Nothing to add. Thank you.
All right, then let's do a consent round, and Adam, me, Michael, and then Luciano. So Lizzie? Great. Adam?
I consent.
I consent as well. Michael? And Luciano?
Let me think about it. I think I'll consent, yeah.
Well, then it sounds like we'll be good with moving from that 500 to 750 a year.
So that gives you a little bit of an idea of just how that feels in practice. I do want to name that this is a really simple example, that there weren't any questions. And I do want to say that moving into a deeper dive into sociocracy, there's a lot that goes into creating objections and working with that in a kind and thoughtful way in the group. So yeah, if you're curious, like that's definitely a good next step to go into. Let me share my screen again real quick. Okay, beautiful. So yeah, okay, I'll go through just a couple more slides and then I'll take some questions. So as you might have noticed, there are a couple clear roles in that little role play that we watched. So there's a facilitator, the person who's facilitating the rounds, making sure that people stay on track. They're kind of keeping the tabs of the energy in the room. So kind of noticing, oh, there's some tension. Maybe we should address that, or maybe we need to pause and just all take a breath together. The facilitator is also the person who will restate the proposal if there's a modification, and then just really kind of honing in on like the facilitation in the moment at the meeting. And then the secretary, who's going to assist in the agenda creation before the meeting. They're going to kind of keep tabs on the backlog for what might need to be slotted into the meeting. They're going to take notes, and they might even keep time for the meeting. You can distribute this to a different person, but sometimes that doesn't feel fully necessary. So and these roles can kind of shift, and like I said, this can be very customizable depending on your organization. But these are the more obvious that were in that role play, and I'll talk about a couple more later that are a little less obvious and come into play more when you have bigger organizations that are needing to communicate with each other. And then just want to spend a little bit of time on objections. It's really, really important to think about objections as gifts. Someone saying, I really think this is going to hurt our ability to achieve our aim. And so I really need to object. And then it's the responsibility of the whole group to work on that objection together. It's really important that that person does not feel singled out as like, okay, well, now you have to come up with the answer. The whole group needs to consider that objection and come up with the answer. And just to spend a little bit of time on like how you might work to integrate those objections, you might think about how do we modify the proposal to make it a little safer? how do we put a timeline on it at which time we can reevaluate and see if it's working, see if the concern that the objector has is relevant. And really just working with that person to see, like, how can we walk the proposal back just a little bit to make it feel safer, to feel more comfortable, to feel good now. And it's really important to think about range of tolerance. So there's sort of like, I love this idea, I don't love this idea, but I'm okay with it if someone else leads it, and then idea is a bad idea and it would harm our organization. So when you're objecting, you're really saying that bottom thing, that I really am afraid of this, or I really think, just I don't like it, I prefer this. Cool, then you can bring a proposal about that other idea next time. So that's yeah, something that I like to talk about. And I will pause here before I go into what multi-circle organizations look like, just to take questions in case there are any. Feel free to raise your hand or come off mute. Any questions I can answer for you all? There's something in the chat. As I understand this, the proposals can be generated by anyone in the circle. Yes, so ideally that would happen before the meeting. So that person would say, hey, send something to the secretary or whoever's in charge of creating the, and saying, like, here's my proposal. And you really want to have that pretty fleshed out at the point you're like asking for a group decision. Like, here's the plan, here's who's going to accomplish the plan, here's when the plan should be done by. All of those details should ideally be fleshed out once it's in proposal phase. And yeah, they can send that on to the secretary, and the secretary will kind of fit it in with the other agenda items and bring it. And I don't have a slide on this, but I think it's important to talk about defined membership in the circle. It's really helpful when you understand who's in the circle. And so this, as you get into bigger organizations where there's some people who kind of come in and out, it's hard to keep track of who's actually in the circle and who has consent power in the circle. So having like, okay, you're a member and you're a member and you're a member, and here's what membership means in this circle, can really help with like who's able to bring a proposal to the circle. And the defined members don't have to be deal. But it kind of helps to just have some clarity around who's actually in the circle, who's responsible for what the circle is doing. But yeah, anyone can have a proposal. And in Sociocracy, we like to say that nothing should really come out of the blue. So if you're creating a proposal and you're like, wow, this is the first time the group is hearing about this at all, it might actually be better to bring that as an exploration first for the group to kind of get that temperature check. And see if the group has input that you can then use to generate their proposal more fully and fleshed out at the next meeting. So that can be really good. And I also noticed that it's really good to have a good balance of explorations and proposals, so that the group is kind of getting feedback on some things and having some discussions and having input, but then is also actually making decisions on some things as well that can make like really effective, really collaborative, and like you're actually getting things done together. Yeah, any other questions for Amivo? How is Sociocracy operating given the existing public-private governance methods? Yeah, that's a really big question. I think that mostly the Sociocracy is being used in co-op, volunteer spaces, and nonprofit spaces. But I do think that it has a lot more capacity, and I think that more corporate environments are actually getting curious about it, which is exciting. And it kind of has to start small. You have to have an implementation circle that starts the transition toward this type of governance. So it kind of has to build up from the ground, which I think is really important as we're, that really high level governance structures are not ready to engage with this level of consent. I think right now it's still at the grassroots level, but with a lot of capacity to build out. And I think also that the current public sector governance structures are trying to manage way too big a number of people. So if you think about sociocracy, we're working in groups of like 4 to 10 in a circle. And those circles can kind of nest, and I'll talk about that as that goes up. But right now we're looking at least in my city, the city council of 12 people is responsible for a city of 650,000. And that's not really broken down into smaller neighborhood governance structures at all. And so I think like as we transition to more collaborative governance styles, we need to have really strong nested scales of governance. So yeah, thanks for that question. All right, feeling good? Should we move on? Thanks for those great questions. They're juicy, juicy, juicy. Okay, I will share my screen. Okay, so yeah, moving in a little deeper into that about how does this scale circle organizations. So why might you add circles? So if your team has more than 10 people, that's a great time to say, okay, there's a lot of energy here and we have this big mission. So how do we add another aim? What's another way that we're going to accomplish our mission? Yeah, and your categories of work might diversify. Team members might have particular interests. So like, oh, I really, really like on grants, but I don't really care about outreach or social media or whatever. And then your bandwidth might vary. So some team members might want to be really involved and they want to be in every circle. And other team members are like, I only have time for one meeting a month. So that's another reason that you might start difference in bandwidth. So in a sociocratic organization, it's recommended that you have at least a general circle and a mission circle. The general circle is sometimes also called the coordination circle. This is the place where all of the communication flows through the organization. So let's say that this green circle is maybe like outreach, and this yellow circle is like garden management. Maybe you run a community garden organization. And then this blue circle is like volunteer coordination. So each of these circles would have, so each of these small circles is like a person. So each of these circles would send someone to the general circle. And so the general circle would be made up of 8 members in this case, in this example. And that general circle would give report backs on the smaller child circles have been doing, what they're making decisions, what they're working on, so that there's communication flow throughout the organization. The mission circle is really keeping an eye on like the whole mission of the organization. Are we being effective? Are we communicating with each other well? Are we doing what we set out to do? Are we facilitating relationships with external entities well? Those sorts of things. So just to go into a little deeper conversation about the difference between a general circle and a mission circle, which can also be like your board of directors, might be your mission circle in a nonprofit setting. So general circle is really not making their own decisions. That's really just the place where communication flows. So there's very few decisions that actually get made at the general circle level. It's really just the place where coordination happens. But they will also create new, if they're like, hey, there's a lot of energy around this thing, these people want to do that, let's go create a new child circle. And then they also select leaders and approve delegates. So we'll just talk a little bit more about in a moment. And then the mission circle, like I said, is keeping track of the organization's missions. It's managing those like legal relationships, external entity relationships, and focusing on the bigger picture. So in sociocracy, you also have this concept called double linking. So you notice that there were 2 people who were sort of on the edge of both of those parent and child circles. And so you have from the general circle, someone is elected as a leader or selected, same thing in sociocracy. So someone is elected, and I'll talk about that in a moment, as a leader who is sort of representing the general circle, who's going to be sort of a background person in the child circle to just say like, hey, are we accomplishing our aim? And they might help create the agenda, and then they're going to report back to the general circle when the general circle meets. The delegate is someone from the child circle who is going to the general circle meetings and reporting back to the child circle about what was decided there, what happened, what are other child circles doing and like really facilitating that communication flow. So these two links help so that there's not a single person who's responsible for the communication flow. So if there's one person who's trying to say like, well, the child circle did this and then the general circle did this, sometimes those priorities get a little bit out of whack and you could be like more attached to one circle than the other. But if you have one person who's like, hey, I'm part of this child circle and I'm visiting this other meeting, and then I'll come back and tell you what happened. And then one person who is at the general circle level and say, I'm going to visit this child circle and come back and say what happened. Then you have two opportunities for communication flow and less bias comes in. So ideally, this can happen. I will say that double linking is sometimes hard to achieve. And it's like, if you can't do double linking, that's okay. Single links are also okay. But ideally, you would have these paired communication flows. So revisiting roles for a minute. So again, the leader is someone who is selected at the general circle level to go visit a particular child circle and report back. The delegate is someone who is selected by the child circle to go visit the general circle and give report backs to the child circle about what happens there. And then the facilitator, who's like the person actually facilitating the meeting. The leader is kind of just like in the background. They're pretty hands off, but they're just sort of like representing the needs of the organization in the group. And they're kind of more of the big picture person. And then again, the secretary doing the note taking, to helping the leader with the agenda creation and taking notes, keeping time. So this is just another image of a possible sociocratic organization. And I just want to mention that we talk about sociocracy as sort of less hierarchical, but there are still these nested scales that are important. Like I talked about these child-parent relationships in circles. But it's important to note that like because of the communication flows, because each of these circles have their own purview, their own authority, like this circle, if it's, let's say, the social media circle, they have more decision-making power over social media than the board of directors does. The board of directors has no authority over social media, for instance. And so in that way, this has more power and like is higher in the hierarchy about social media than anyone else in the organization. But everyone has their thing that they have authority over. And so these don't conflict, and everyone has something that they feel empowered to work on. So there's this sensation of power with instead of power over. And yeah, just looking at this visually, all of these lines are connected. So if we were all to stand in a circle in this framework and hold hands, and then all step back, we would all be in a bigger circle. So there is this sort of circular hierarchy thing happening with the communication flows and the power. And then thinking about, as you're creating domains and aims for each of these circles in your organization, just making sure that there aren't any gaps, like whose domain is it to do finances? Oh no, we didn't decide that. Okay, well, we need a finance circle, right? And then making sure that there's also not too many overlaps, because that's where you're going to get some conflict. Like, wait, I thought this was in our domain. No, it's in your domain, so that can also cause tension in the organization. So just thinking about that. Yeah, so then the selection process I mentioned, we would spend a little bit of time on this. So yeah, as you're thinking about selecting roles, so there's 3 roles in any given circle that I would say you might want to do selections process for. And the selection process doesn't need to necessarily be for meeting roles specifically. This can also be like, hey, we're trying to decide between this venue and this venue. And how do we want to do that as a group? So this can be a way to vote between proposals or venues or locations or whatever you're doing, or it can be a way to actually select a person to hold a role. So you're thinking about, okay, what will this person be doing? That's really important to know ahead of time. What do they have purview over? Is this a paid role or not? Just so there's a lot of clarity over like, what does this mean to hold this role? Then the qualifications. What qualifications are necessary for a person to succeed in this role? So yeah, like what do we want out of someone who's holding this role? So if you're electing a facilitator, well, we might want somebody who's really good at noticing the energy in the room, We might want someone who's very articulate and can synthesize things on the fly. So you, as a group, you would do a conversation round to name all of these qualifications. And then the term, how long is this role? They're not going to hold it indefinitely. And when will we review how they did in this role? So that's kind of like the things that have to happen before you're ready to enter the selection process. And then the selection process itself consists of a nomination round, a change round, and a consent round. So in this process, we're going to do conversation rounds like we witnessed in that little video. So you would go around and you might say, I think that Julie would do a great job in this facilitator role because she is just very good at sensing energy in the room. And everyone would go around and they'd nominate someone and they'd say why. And so then the facilitator would keep track of who gets voted for and why, who gets nominated and why, or really just who nominated who is like the thing that you keep track of. And then there's an opportunity to change your vote. So in the change round, based on what other people said, does that change who you want to nominate? Or another thing that happens in Sociocracy is that you can nominate yourself. You can be like, hey, I really think that I would do a good job in this. I'm really excited about this role. I'm going to nominate myself. And sometimes that will affect people in the change round, like, oh, well, if you want to do this, then yeah, I totally think you should do this. And so that might change who you would nominate. And then at the end of that change round, then you tally up the people who have the most votes. And then you ask the whole group for consent. So you do another consent round and like, do you consent to this person holding this role for this term? Yes or no, and including the person who was selected. So if the person who is selected says, I don't have time to do this, are you kidding me? I don't want to do it. Then okay, then you go to the next person who has the most votes, right? Until you have consent. Or they say like, yeah, I'm really flattered that you selected me. I'm really glad to hear that the group thinks of me in this way. That's really special to me. But I can only serve in this role for 3 months instead of 6 months. Is that okay? And then, then the group would do a reaction round. Like, how does that feel to the group? And then you would, decide and do a consent round again together to decide if that shortened term works for you. So that's another way that you could like incorporate or integrate objections in this way. So I had that we might do a role play where we would try this out together, but with such a small group, it's kind of like varying levels of participation. I might move past that so we just have more time for discussion and questions at the end. But just kind of imagining for yourself, like how this might go in practice, who you might nominate as like, all right, if we're going to choose a spokesperson, like what qualifications I want that person to have, how long they serve in that role, what would I say about that? And just kind of imagining how that would work. So I will move through that so we can have more discussion time. And then as I mentioned, you want to decide a term for those roles and have a set time when you're going to do some kind of like performance review or like how did that go for everybody. I will say that in the organizations I've seen who have implemented Sociocracy, this is the biggest piece that I don't see or like that people leave out. It's just like, it's way too much time to do performance reviews for every role in the organization. We're not going to do that. But it's important to know that feedback is how we learn. That's how we grow. And so in Sociocracy, they really encourage you to do feedback and performance reviews about policies that the group is making together. So if we have a standing policy that we're using Sociocracy, for instance, we've decided we're going to use Sociocracy and we're going to reevaluate it in a year, then in a year's time, we'll say like, how is that going for us? What might we want to change about it? And that can really help, again, build that consensus reality for a group and keep it in everyone's mind. Like, why did we do this? Why is this important to us? And then we can continue to build and iterate on it and make it better and more adapted to our specific context. So feedback is really important. So other ways that you provide feedback is the meeting feedback at the end of the meetings. I think is really, really beautiful and important and is a great way for us to review and grow. Performance reviews for each member and specifically each role that they're holding if possible. and regular feedback for individual circles so that the whole circle can have a review process on some kind of cadence. Like, hey, are we accomplishing what we set out to do? What might we want to do better? What's our improvement plan for going forward? And yeah, what are we doing well? What are we doing not so well? And just really having that conversation as a whole group. And then, yeah, you can also do feedback for the whole organization. Like, as an organization, how's our communication going? And do we like how this is going? Do we have enough bandwidth to keep going? And those are important conversations to have. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about inclusivity in sociocracy, because really the goal here is to have equitable conversations where we have shared and distributed power and people are responsible for showing up and being in their own power. And this can be really scary for a lot of people, and especially in our environments that have actually disempowered people and stripped them of their agency. So trying to think about like, okay, we're coming from a very low agency place as a collective being, as a collective species, and then shifting into like, hey, everyone has a little bit of power is sometimes really scary and disruptive for people. So really allowing for this process and this implementation of collaborative governance structures to be slow, to be kind, to be gentle, and then allowing for a lot of diversity in learning styles and communication styles. So I like to think about, like, as a facilitator or as someone who's bringing sociocracy to a group for the first time, doing this with a lot of patience, with a lot of kindness, with a lot of acceptance, and thinking about what is a nonverbal way that someone could participate in this meeting, maybe with gestures or head nods if verbal speech is not comfortable for them, or just offering more time for pausing. So it wasn't really modeled in the video that I showed you, but okay, before we think about whether or not we feel like we want to consent to this proposal, let's just all take a moment of silence. And just allowing for that to percolate through the group so that everyone actually has a moment to feel it in their body and decide whether they're a yay or a nay, a consent or object. And you can even open with a grounding exercise of some kind just to help settle everyone's nervous system and bring it in and remember that you're all on the same team. Something that can help with that too is reading the group's aim or the mission of the group at the beginning of the meeting. Like, let's remember why we're here. And now let's move into the actual logistics of what we need to get done here. So I just want to name it. These are some gestures that are not actually from sociocracy. They're from the Occupy movement, but I really like just to teach people about them, just to let you know where they come from, and just some options. So this is like, oh, I really agree with that. Like, yeah, someone said something and I really liked that. I really agree with that. That can help shorten the talking time in a meeting, because that can really like bloat topics and take up a lot of time. So if you're just like, you know what, I really agree with that next person, kind of a thing, can make that easier. If you need to go out of turn, if it's like, well, the conversation rounds are flowing and that's great, but wow, I have some really important information about what that person just said. Like, hey, I know something about that and I don't think anybody else does. So you might do this gesture as like direct response. If someone's like really talking for a long time, you can have a really gentle culture in your group of like, hey, okay, we need to move on to the next person. Like this is talking, you're talking a lot. Let's move on to the next person. And then yeah, of these ones, I do this one a lot. I just like, yes, I love that. So yeah, and like this one's kind of fun, like clarifying question. And then there's actually one that's not on here that I really like, and this can actually be a role in your group if you're feeling it. But this one is vibes watch. So it's just like, hey, there's a lot of tension in the room. Let's get back on topic. So that could be a fun cue if your facilitator knows what you're talking about. So just ways to participate non-verbally in meetings that I think are fun. This is a lot of information, and I want to just give you some things that you can take back to your groups, just little tiny ways that you could start implementing this new culture of being more equitable and distributing power. So it can be as simple as just like, hey, let's check in with each other at the beginning of a meeting. At the end of the meeting, let's do some meeting feedback. Maybe let's try talking in these rounds. Let's ask if everyone understood that. Did everyone understand that? Are we all in the same reality? What's everyone's reaction to that? Can we just go in a round and hear what people are thinking about that, because wow, that was a lot, so it's like these are things that you could offer even if you're not the facilitator, like, hey, I'd really like to hear from everybody about how they feel about that. And then as you're thinking about like, how do we shift our current structure, like who right now in your organization, and I challenge you to do this, like who is making decisions in your organization right now? Why are they making decisions? And what does that person need to feel safe delegating those decisions? What sometimes there's trauma, there's reasons why they're afraid of delegating that power. Oftentimes it's like they did sort of an incomplete handoff. They're like, okay, you handle this, but they didn't give that person all the information they needed to make an educated decision, and so it went wrong. And then the person in power will say like, well, it went wrong last time, so I'm not going to try that again. And so sometimes there's a lot of trauma that you need to unpack with the person who is currently making decisions in the group, and just let them air that. Just let them talk about that. What do you need to feel safe in giving other people power? And that can be a really difficult conversation to have, but it's also really important as you start talking about transitioning governance structures. Like, who are the people who have power right now? They probably don't even want to have that power. So what do they need to start offering that to everybody else? And so those are the questions you can start asking yourself as you're getting curious about this. There's also really lovely books that are through Sociocracy for All. There's Many Voices, One Song, which is a great book about sociocracy. There's Collective Power. That's another great book. Who Decides is another great book. And then for implementation specifically, there's one called From Here to There. So those are all really great and available through Sociocracy for All. And then just in case you're curious about like, what does it look like to have a consultant come and work with your group on actually implementing this as a governance structure. So that process would be gathering information about your organization and the current power dynamics. It might be helping to facilitate some of those conversations about like who's actually making decisions and what do they need help with to help distribute that power. So yeah, that would be like power and needs mapping with existing authorities, drafting that governance agreement and the implementation plan, developing a circle structure. So, okay, we have all of these work circles, and how do we actually make those nest together? And what does it look like to have a general circle? And is there a circle that's kind of a general circle already? And kind of building that structure together. And then just like ongoing implementation support. I often talk about my work as a governance consultant as organizational therapy, because a lot of the time it's just like, okay, so how do we get into this situation? And how do we really gently and kindly work through all of the knots that we've created together until we're like actually back to a shared reality context and kindness and care for each other and our mission. And then, as I mentioned, here's some resources. There's a lot of more videos that you can watch to see like different edge cases of how these conversation rounds work, how the objection integrations work. I have a link to the hand gestures, some agenda templates, and then my Patreon, as I do all this work presently by donation. So yeah, in case you want to support that work. And I'll go ahead and stop sharing so we can open it up for a discussion. Comments, questions. Yeah, what's coming up for you?
Can I ask a question or advice?
Yeah, please.
So we're going to elect leaders of circles soon. And the question is, so the general circle nominates and then selects these leaders with their qualities. What's next? Before we had situation when like who want to be part of this circle, and some people say yes, and they're a circle. But then some cases we realize that people cannot work with each other, or there might be conflict with leader or one of the members of a circle, and they don't want to work with each other, or they can't. So now we think maybe the leaders choose somehow the circle, or how to do it in the right way.
Yeah, so what I didn't mention about that selection process is once the leader is selected at the general circle level, the child circle also still needs to consent. So they, like at that point, if the child circle doesn't consent, to that particular leader from the general circle, then you kind of begin the process over.
And if we imagine that we create new circle or circles, then
yeah.
how do we know who is part of the circle? Like, because if it's just random people, there might be not so well together.
Right. So at the general circle level, as you're creating a new circle, you do kind of need to have an idea of who's holding the circle energy. So if you know that there's, maybe there's a couple people from the general circle who want to participate in that smaller new circle, and then you need to pull in some outside people as well. And so if there's tension and conflict between some of those people, then the first thing I would try is doing some conflict resolution with them to really talk about like, okay, like you both have really strong, beautiful visions about this process, and you have really beautiful, diverse perspectives on how that can happen. Is there a way that we can get you both on the same page about that, and maybe having a facilitated conversation? And if that's not possible, then thinking about, like how can you create different domains for those two people to exist in on that spectrum? So it sounds, I'm not totally sure what the domain of the temple would be, but maybe there's, we have one in this geographic location and we have one in this geographic location, and there's different people on those two circles. So it just kind of really depends on the context and who's involved and if they're willing to go into sort of conflict resolution with each other. So yeah. Is that helpful?
And
You have any questions about that?
Yeah, sorry, it's just but usually just everyone who wants can be part of the circle. So we don't nominate and elect circle members, and also the leader do not take the team from what he or she wants. So it just happens that everyone can go in.
Yeah, you're not nominating individual members just for roles. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Another question was, will I be forwarding the recorded meeting for future reference? And I think it's being recorded by someone else. And so hopefully they will send it out to your network. But I would also love a copy if possible. Okay, other questions? I'm going to post into the chat the slides, so at least you have those. In case you want to use that. Thank you for the gratitude, Larry. Yeah, okay. Any other questions? Julie, go for it.
How does this work with nonprofit board of directors and the bylaws that govern how they're selected and
so really big, beautiful question. And I actually have been asking this myself, because I'm like, well, you kind of have to have like a president and a vice president and a secretary and a treasurer. Like, what's the deal? How do you do that sociocratically?
All these folks are yes.
But so you can, in your bylaws, decide what the titles are, and you can split up those roles between multiple people if needed. So like the president, the president might have particular roles that are set out by the bylaws, and that could be a role that is elected, but you can also call it something different, even in the bylaws. You can say like, okay, for the purpose of, the government, the president is the leader of this group, or the president is the facilitator of this group, whatever that means to your team. And if you have existing bylaws, then there's sort of like a parallel governance agreement that you'll need to start drafting that you'll shift to eventually. So if you have an existing organization that's already operating under current bylaws, then excuse me, then you basically you create a implementation circle, and that implementation circle will draft a new governance agreement that'll take the bylaws into account and sort of translate them into sociocracy, and then have the full group consent to them once that translation has occurred. But for roles like treasurer, that would be a role that's more, so there's sort of meeting roles like the facilitator, the leader, the secretary, the delegate, like we talked about. And then there's operational roles. So the treasurer would be an operational role. So they would have particular responsibilities inside of whatever that bylaws power has given them. So there's a lot of ways to kind of like work within the system to still use the sociocratic process and include that in the bylaws. And there's often times where specific organizations feel like they might need a fail-safe of some kind, like if for whatever reason it's impossible to achieve consent, and especially with things like, we really don't like this current president or something of the board, and we really feel like they need to leave. That can be a really difficult thing to get consent on. And so some organizations will say like, okay, in the event that a consent cannot be achieved, here's like our fail-safe majority rules thing. And is that sociocracy? Not exactly. But that's what I'm saying is like sometimes it has to be customized based on like the comfort level of the group. And if they feel like they need fail-safes like that, that can be documented in the bylaws. So does that help to kind of like name how that might happen? It's a little complicated. Yeah. It's a big question.
I'm hearing there's a integration or transition and that sociocracy can be incorporated into bylaws, but there's a process to do that.
Yeah, totally. And then the other thing is that you might have the board, and the mission circle might actually include more people than are on the board. So that is something that you could do as well, where like the board is like 4 people inside of the mission circle, or however that works, so that there's a little bit more communication flow and ability to hold roles and things like that. So the people in the mission circle might be holding board roles, but the mission circle might be bigger than the board. So that's a possibility as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions?
Another question I have is, in case if there is a conflict and some people are not agree to work with someone, like does Sociocracy has any ways of taking someone out, as you said, with a role? I suppose we can take someone from role, but what about the whole circle structures? I mean, we cannot continue. Maybe not just conflict of 2 people, but some strong tension, and someone is kind of on a border, and we don't know how to put him out, or should we, or what process we should follow in this difficult situation.
Yeah. So this is a big question, and I think that in an ideal setting, your sociocracy is really based on relationship tending. And so really trying to do conflict resolution strategies as much as possible, and sort of like that restorative justice process as much as you can. And I believe that there are some frameworks and templates through Sociocracy for All about that conflict resolution process. Can be something you might need to bring an external mediator into to say like, hey, let's really try to get at these underlying tensions and what's going on, and what does this person need to feel safe enough that they can kind of unpack some of this, what's ever going on for them and their behaviors. But if you've tried that, or if your group does not have the bandwidth for that, then I think it would be something that it'd be an interesting situation, because I don't think that person would necessarily like consent to being kicked out in that way. But it might just be something that the rest of the members have to consider without that person, and make that decision. I will say that just sort of like taking my sociocracy facilitator hat off for a second. For myself personally, I think a lot about how in kind of more like if we think about very tribal societies, if someone was exiled from a group, they might die. And I know that that's a really extreme case, but I just think about that because in our current modern context, when we kick someone out of a group, they're not learning. They're not getting feedback about what happened. They're not having the opportunity to do repair and to reintegrate into that community. And then we're also potentially setting other groups up for the same patterns. So if that person does not experience the feedback and the learning that they need in that environment, and they're exiled from whatever space, and they go into a new space where they're perpetuating the same cycles of harm, then we've just kicked the can down the road. So I'm not saying that, your group is necessarily responsible for doing all of that collective healing work. I think that that's a lot to ask, especially of a volunteer group, especially of a nonprofit, especially of really anyone in this day and age who's really stressed and under really difficult conditions right now. But just thinking about what is one thing we can do to maybe offer this person some feedback and help them not re-enter these cycles of harm with the next group that they're a part of. And just coming at it from that sort of restorative justice lens, instead of just being like, well, there's a conflict, let's kick them out. And I do think that it's, sometimes those fail safes are necessary. Sometimes your group does not have the tools to handle that situation, and they want to name that. Sometimes it can be really dangerous and violent. And so, seeking that external help, seeking external mediators, and really offering that person feedback in a kind and safe environment, I think can help. So hopefully that was a satisfying response. I know it's a difficult situation.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay. Well, unless there's any burning questions, I think we'll shift to feedback. Any other questions? Did you have one, Julie?
I can't wait to see it all happen. Yeah, this is really good. Thank you for sharing this slide. I need to say that. I guess, the groups that have not leaned into conflict and have fallen apart, which is the majority. I had an end to that thought and I don't have it anymore. Sorry.
Okay, yeah. Maybe what that inspires and brings up in me is just that I really just want to reiterate that sociocracy is a relational process. And there's sort of if you have a threshold of what it takes to be a cohesive, effective group, there's lots of ways you can meet that threshold. You can meet it with relationships, you can meet it with shared values, you can meet it with structure. And those different areas to try to get to that threshold of coherence can vary. So you can have we have no relational, almost no relational coherence, but we have a lot of shared values and we have a little bit of structure and we've hit that point of coherence. So great. And so every organization is going to look different. They're going to maybe have a lot of community glue or relational awareness with each other, maybe not very many shared values, but they have a lot of structure and that can make up for that difference. And so sociocracy is really trying to adapt and create an environment where we care about each other, where we empower each other, and where we're constantly in relationship with each other to build that shared context. So and that's where I said at the beginning, if you don't have shared values around collective empowerment, shared decision-making, and commitment to growth, then it can be really difficult to enter into sociocracy because it's really asking you to care about other people. And it's, sometimes that's actually a high bar in various organizations, especially corporate environments. So just want to name that. Okay, so I'd love to get just a little bit of feedback from you. So I'd love to do a round if that's possible. So so questions, just how are you feeling right now? How was that presentation for you? What is some constructive criticism that I could take back with me to improve this presentation going forward? And what did you like? Just kind of questions around that. And I will start with Julie.
I wish I had recorded little pieces of this, so maybe it'd be good for me to, like when you took your sociocracy hat off, actually. I mean, it was, yeah. So if I could get a copy of the recording, that'd be great. But I also sense that urgency that I have to like grab and hold and like figure out what to do with pieces of amazing, by the way, there's my feedback, presenting amazingly useful information and frameworks. I recognize that there's some trust being built in me, like similar to what you talked about. Instead of people popcorning and like interrupting each other and having to raise their hands and get in a queue and maybe you'll run out of time, and like there's an urgency sense in meetings, and I'm getting that as opposed to when you start to implement a process, there's more trust built so people can settle and wait their turn. I'm actually getting that kind of higher wisdom feedback for myself, so I don't have to grab a hold of little pieces and figure out who I should send it to, and because that all feels actually overwhelming for the broken relationships I have. That's my feedback. You did a great job. What can I say?
Beautiful, thank you. Moving to Mountain Land. Yeah, feedback, thoughts, feelings?
My name is Igor in Mountain Land, and yeah, this is a great job. I joined that. Thank you very much. And most of it I knew, and we run a school for children, and we use Socratic circles there. We don't use feedback, as you mentioned, right? As a lot of others. As there will be election in the community, it was very timely for me to see this presentation and to remind about some things. And I made a few pictures from your slides. Also, we recorded a video. I hope it's okay to share it at least through Deep Life Gathering. There are no other folks from Europe, but it's quite late already. So we will share it, the recording. And is it possible to access a presentation file or some PDF or something?
Yeah, I can send it in the chat.
If you can send it to Deep Life Gathering or to Katerina, it would be super helpful. Thank you for what you're doing. This is really needed.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm curious if the other person there has any feedback they'd like to share.
Thank you very much. I joined late, but I think so clear and coherent, and it also found me at the perfect time in my journey. So thank you. Really.
I love hearing that. And Kyra, if you're there, do you have any thoughts, feedback, feelings that you'd like to offer? Okay, well, if you come back in, let us know. And I'll just say that, yeah, this was lovely to be here with you all. I really enjoyed the opportunity to share what I've been learning and what I've been really excited about. And just delighted to be part of this community. I read Jem Bendel's Breaking Together book last year. It was really transformative for me. So it was cool to be part of that community in some broader way and to give back. So thank you for having me and for being a great audience. And yeah, I'm excited to see how this ripples out. So thank you so much. I'm also going to post in the chat. I'm doing a deeper dive course. So the first part will kind of be a similar intro, and then the second part will be more deeper into like how to integrate objections and how to do the selection process and just getting comfortable about some of the like policy structures of sociocracy. So I'll put some information in the chat about when that's happening. So if you want to come to that second part, you're welcome to do that. And That is through the Design School for Regenerating Earth, and they do have a $50 a year subscription, but I'm able to give some scholarships. So if you're curious about that, and you want to be part of that bigger bioregional community and all of their learning that is online, then please email me and I can get you in contact with them. And then the second part of that presentation is going to be on December 1st at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. So awesome. Thank you so much. And yeah, be well on your journey through this steep adaptation event cycle. It's been a really beautiful thing to watch.